We're going to go ahead and start. We have a special returning guest, Terry Minnis, who was awesome last meeting, if you guys remember, in putting the recommendations together. All right. So Terry and Julie are going to help drive this. Where's Carol? There's Carol. All right, we're going to have to kind of shrink that down because I can't see the first. Yeah. So probably margins under page layout. All right. Yeah, I'm going to have Julie go ahead because my voice is a little rough. These are the recommendations that you guys emailed to the chair NAC at Gmail. So we're going to read aloud what we had, but there's, of course, probably either edits or clarifications. Stuart? Okay, well,
I think we've got the email up, and so we'll pull up whatever new ones
yes.
come in.
We're going to go from what we started in the beginning, and then if we get to it this afternoon, otherwise we'll do it tomorrow. All right. So Julie, you ready?
Okay, so it looks like the first one we have is recommendation. Add the canceled 2017 field test on tribal lands and in Puerto Rico to the 2018 end-to-end test. The text underneath this, I guess this is the explanation that this person provided. It says this test was going to identify possible solutions to the difficulty reaching AIAN respondents without mailing addresses and barriers to in-person enumeration. The AIAN population experienced the largest undercount, 4.9%, of any major population group in the 2010 census, so it is critical to include the tribal lands field test. Note that civil rights groups already are making this request for 2018 appropriations in their work with congressional appropriations staff.
Does everyone understand, or was this?
Do we want to have the person who made the recommendation clarify, maybe?
Yes, that would be good, because I think it's helpful to. Okay.
Do people want an expert? Mylea, do you want to maybe, if the other person who said it, do you want to explain it maybe for folks in case people have questions about what this relates to? Anybody need anything? Okay.
Did you have something to add to this?
Turn on your mic so that the people can.
Oh, sorry. I think mine is related. It just asked for detailed explanation about, which would be the same idea, but about the drop dead dates and the repercussions. Mine wasn't as nicely worded. It's like one sentence. There it is. Number 2. They should clearly outline, you could just add it, outline the contingencies around the AIN field test with possible, quote, drop dead dates and implications on the census count for missing those drop dead dates. Because they should talk about the implications of not doing the field test and the different costs for doing the field test so they can more clearly identify those. So that's because if they say, no, we're not going to do it for the first one, they should explain a little bit more.
We're going to take yours and move it up with the other one, and then we can edit them together, okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
So just for clarification, that first recommendation, James, are you still on the line? Was that the one that you submitted? And I want to make sure you're okay with us editing and adding additional.
Yes, yeah. In fact, it's funny because I think Kirsten is on exactly the same page with me. I think her addition is perfect.
Thank you, James. Okay, we're going to add this real time. Please identify yourself and use the microphone.
This is Mylea. I would like that we not combine them. I think that they are nicely outlined as two separate things that we are asking for recommendations and action on. I think we are asking for the canceled field test to be included. And then a second recommendation is that there should be clarification on some of the decisions that are being made so that we understand the process. I think they're two separate things, and I would hate for one to be like, well, we'll tell you why not, without addressing the first thing, which is the direct recommendation to have it included.
This is Desi. Do we actually want to separate it out so that it's just tribal lands and then Puerto Rico separate?
I think if we mean it for both, let's just keep them, it seems pretty clear to me.
They were canceled together, so they can stay together.
Do you all want the explanatory text that's below that to be in there with the recommendation, or do you just want the one sentence short and sweet? Short and sweet? Okay.
Actually, I think the explanatory text, especially saying the largest undercount, is useful to put context for as a public document. I think that's nice.
And for anyone who isn't here,
We'll put it in italics below it. That's how a lot of our recommendations are, the bold recommendation, and then beneath it, the italics explanation.
So I think one question though is,
Kirsten?
We hadn't talked about a drop dead date, but do they have to match? This is the question, should they match if we say field tests on tribal lands and in Puerto Rico? Am I excluding somebody in that recommendation around just saying the AIAN field test? I want to make sure I'm inclusive, or is mine, I want to make sure my language is inclusive, I don't want to be excluding something.
Did you want to say AIAN and Puerto Rico field tests and?
I didn't know if I had to be consistent with the first one, or if we had
Could you
to.
just say around these field tests, since it follows the recommendation directly, it should be
Yeah. Whatever we
might
need to
be
do to make it.
straightforward?
Okay, are these two recommendations clear? Okay, so should we take a vote on the first recommendation? All those, let's say, anyone opposed to this recommendation, speak up. All those, Arturo.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to the recommendation, but I think this is the larger question that Kristen has raised with the Census Bureau leadership. They're making decisions about what to cut, what to keep, what to accelerate, what to delay. At one point, when they announced the cancellation of the 2017 test for the tribal lands in Puerto Rico, they said they would hope to add them into the 2018 end-to-end test. Since then, we have heard they're canceling things or pausing things in the end-to-end test. So I think rather than saying, recommending specific restoration of particular elements, I think we need to understand the larger question. What are the costs? What criteria is the Bureau using to determine which are essential core elements of the 2020 decennial planning and ramp up, and which are the ones that can be delayed and at what cost? Not financial costs, but at what cost to the census? And I think that's the explanation we need from the Bureau. And I don't know if that's, I'm fine saying this should be restored, but I think that's the larger answers we need from the Bureau. And maybe it's when the president's budget comes out that the director was willing to talk about it, but we need to know.
So is that something we can add to sort of Kristen's recommendation about clarifying, making it a little bit bigger? Kristen, do you want to?
Yeah, no, I agree with Arturo, and we can make sure that it's very clear about the costs being, well, the implications on the census count or the census for missing the drop dead dates, and really for missing the field test. So what it means is, but I'm totally comfortable with, because that is the idea, is if they need to be clear about the drop dead dates so that we all know what they are. And then also the implications for not doing the field test, to make them put it into writing that we are willing to forego these field tests, knowing that it will impact our count by 5% or whatever it is, but we are comfortable doing that. I mean, it's okay to make those calls, but it's just helpful sometimes for people to have to say it out loud. A friend of mine said that to his sons. Before they do anything, they should try saying it out loud before they decide to do it. And it's a good general test. So this is making them say it out loud.
I think also, I like this notion of what's the broader question that Arturo is bringing up, because if we can somehow clean this up to kind of address that broader question, or at least imply the broader question, then I think it gives us a strong basis to when we're told, well, we're going to include the enrollment question just because we started it. I mean, you know, I don't want the enrollment question put in there. I just want us to have basis to be able to call out crazy. That's all.
Could we, I mean, I guess what I'm sensing here is this need for like, there's some sort of metrics or something. I mean, there has to be some sort of guidelines, right, by which they're making these decisions. I mean, if we sit here and talk to, was it Deborah? She was saying they're hard decisions. We don't make them lightly. Well, how do they make them? You know, and I guess that's my question. I totally feel what Arturo's saying and Jerlene, and so it's more kind of the how. I mean, I feel like that should be public information.
This is Jim. I just want to jump in with one suggestion, because I think it's what everyone's talking about. I think we need to use the word transparency with that second point.
And also that this larger question applies to, or could apply to, more instances than just what we have here. So going from sort of micro to macro, which would be the larger recommendation.
So why don't we keep this one, but then I think we should do a macro recommendation about transparency and decision-making for budget. I know Carol and then Tyke, you have it.
I was just going to say, to follow up on what Arturo was saying, and I'm not going to say this properly, but really what's the implication to the census mission and goal to not conduct these tests? And I'm not saying that right, there's double negatives in there, but I think somewhere even in the italics, if we were to add something like that to ask for a deeper response, unrelated to, I mean, and the field test is an example. We do want a specific answer to that question, but we're also asking a bigger question, which is, as these budget decisions are being made, what are the implications to count everybody once and only once in the right place? So I think that is the bigger issue that's got all of us kind of going on this particular topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump on this topic of transparency, which I think is exactly right. But to me, it feels like the full answer to our request would be full transparency in sharing, you know, the Census Bureau Director's budget, which I don't think he would ever share with us. So the question is, how can we request more transparency than we have now and still hope to get something that is useful? So I'm still relatively new on this committee, but I think that's an important way of framing the ask, would be some recognition that there are, you know, items within that budget that at least the director will not see as discretionary, and then there are items that he probably does see as discretionary, and some sharing of his prioritization among those items that he sees as more discretionary. I think that would be, to me, a reasonable amount of transparency to get a sense of how to weigh something like this issue compared to others.
So obviously, they planned the field tests, and they put in their budget proposal that we're going to do these field tests in tribal lands in Puerto Rico for X, Y, and Z reasons, because we're going to research X, Y, and Z, and these were the targeted outcomes that we were hoping to research and understand, right? They obviously had that. So when they canceled it, what are you missing then? So whereas X, Y, and Z, where you're justifying that you're going to do this in 2017, now what are we missing, right? That's pretty much what we're saying, is like, you're going to do it and you got support to do it, and now you canceled it, but no one's really talking about what are all the things that you know, were just randomly canceled, right? Like, oh, oops, wasn't important, or, you know, yeah, basically I'm kind of making light of that, but that's what we're saying, is you justified to do it in the first place, now you're not doing it, so what are we missing out?
Yeah, exactly, and you know, we are an advisory body, and I think that this issue of transparency and responsiveness, we're not going to be able to force them, but we can at least emphasize how critical And I'm in favor actually of making not only the first two recommendations, but also include one more recommendation by Arturo about the bigger issue of transparency and responsiveness, just to emphasize that this is important.
And you said you're going to help draft that up? Or are we going to try to draft a bigger? So, all right. Gilberto, did you have a comment? Oh, Hassan, so someone is going to drop off a bigger recommendation about transparency, more general, right?
I think Arturo can rephrase it.
Gilberto had a
Yeah, I was basically going to suggest that we separate transparency from the other issues because these are like a larger cross-cutting issue that we need to consider not only on the tests but also, in other areas. So I think it needs to be separate and phrased very well.
So why don't we put a placeholder, a recommendation 3, just put it in there and just put a placeholder for bigger transparency issue, and then we can either have somebody work on that tonight and bring it back tomorrow.
I was thinking maybe that should be like number 1 then, right? Because we have these under a field test thing, and I think people are asking for transparency more general outside of just that, right? So maybe the first recommendation will be around transparency, and someone, Hassan maybe, will work on that tonight. And then the next two will be about the field test. Does that sound? Okay. We'll put a little space holder in there for that, and we'll renumber these 2 and 3. And then do we want to go ahead and read them again and do the vote on the first 2 that we have?
Thank you, Arturo.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and talk about the 2. Let's do number 2 first. Recommendation, the census should add the canceled 2017 field test on tribal lands and in Puerto Rico to the 2018 end-to-end test.
Do I hear any objections? Hearing none, it'll be passed as an official recommendation. Number 3, please.
The census should be transparent and clearly outline different contingencies around these field tests with possible drop-dead dates and implications on census count for missing those drop-dead dates. Census should further clarify what the different costs are for the different contingencies for the field tests.
The information if we don't do it.
I am not sure. I think this was Kirsten's.
Go ahead, Kirsten. Did you want to say all costs? You want to explain, leave it general for costs?
I'm good with, we could put in parentheses, financial and impact on the census. Because I mean both.
Yeah, okay.
All the different costs, both to the census and I could imagine it's going to get more expensive the later that we go because that's usually how it works. So if you're doing something last minute, it might cost twice as much. And so they just need to be clear about all those decisions that they're making.
And I think what Yolanda, just if I can maybe help out, I think it's also the cost of not doing it. That there is cost to the communities, there's cost of not being represented,
Right.
it's cost to it's a cost that I think has to be weighed, that it's not just a decision about, oh, we can't afford it. There's also the
Outcome
possibility of
cost of not doing
the
it.
cost of not doing it is impactful.
Say that again. I can't hear you. You don't have your mic on. Extrinsic versus intrinsic cost, Vita said, or both? We have
So-
financial and impact. Would we rather say cost both to census and to the communities involved or something like that? Do we want to?
Kirsten, do you have a?
Yeah, we could say financial, financial and impact to the communities and to census's mission. The other place that we can add is what the different costs and then are for the different contingencies, including not conducting the field test.
What just happened? No.
Ruh-roh.
Okay. Thank you, Terry. It's like I must have hit the wrong thing. Okay, so where were we again? We were adding, for the different contingencies, where were you there?
We can add perhaps, or excuse me, including not conducting the field test. Because what I meant by contingencies was all of them. So you could imagine there's a contingency of doing the field
Here.
test completely, only doing one field test, not doing any field tests. And they just need to be clear about the costs to the census mission and to the communities and financial for each of those.
And this is Jim.
Oh, yeah.
I just think in terms of the cost to the community, I would just say in terms of the impact of getting a fair and accurate count of the
Yeah.
affected population, so, something like that.
Yeah, that's
To make
good.
clear, we're not talking about financial costs, we're talking about costs in terms of enumeration.
I'd agree.
Let me read this one again and see if we've got it a little bit better. The census should be transparent and clearly outline different contingencies around these field tests with possible drop dead dates and implications on census count should be count there instead of count? On census counts. Right, well, I'll go on, count. For missing those drop dead dates, census should further clarify what the different costs, both financial costs and possible negative impact to communities of a less accurate count are for the different contingencies, including not doing the test for the field test. Okay, so this is a little bit awkward when I read it. So let's maybe try to edit a little bit more.
Could we just take out this concept of transparency since Arturo's going to do, somebody's working on that one right now, and let's just deal with. So why don't we just say that they should outline different contingencies?
Yeah.
Do we have any reason to believe that they will even provide us with some sort of financial costs? Do we want to just go with cost to communities of a less accurate count? I don't know.
I think we should just ask, and then they can either say, we're not going to, but we'll answer the other thing. So Yolanda, I didn't want to include undercount because when there's a net undercount, you overcounted this population and you undercounted these, and then they put it together like, hey, look, we're even, but they missed the fact that certain populations were missed. So just, I want to keep that out of it for now.
Are we happy with it now? Yes, no, more or less.
All right, anyone opposed to recommendation number 3? Hearing none, that recommendation shall become official.
Yolanda, did you have something you wanted to say?
Should it be, they should clarify what the different costs are? Not, they haven't clarified it in the beginning, so.
Let's not give them that much credit. Okay, I gotcha. Here? Okay. So now we've got, the census should clearly outline, oh, another one? John?
I'm sorry. Going back to 2 a second, and if everyone feels comfortable with the way it is, that's fine. But my one small concern about that is the way we've stated it, then does it suggest to census, if they want to take an extreme view, that, okay, then we need to do these at the expense of, let's say, ACS, or at the expense of taking money from communications to do these tests? And I don't think we are suggesting that they do that. I think we're suggesting
we want to
that-
know.
Right, I think we want to know, and that goes to number 3, is we want to know what the costs are, right? Is we want to be part of the conversation and part of the awareness of what all of these trade-offs that we're talking about are. So that's, I don't want to, I mean, I think we're all in agreement. I'm certainly in agreement with the sense of number 2, but I just want to caution that aspect. Exactly, exactly.
Comments? Anything else?
This is Jim. Perhaps maybe it's almost a corollary. It's almost a separate recommendation that if it's to be restored as part of the 2018 end-to-end test, that it not come at the expense of any other program. Just to make it clear that we're asking for it to be restored in its own right and not at the expense of some other population group.
This is Barry. I'm a little concerned by that. I mean, the Census Bureau has a set amount of money. If it chooses to do A rather than B, and we are opposed to that, we prefer that it does A, but it can't choose to do A and B.
And technically,
I don't think we're in a position to say that, because ultimately, the census is making the decision. All we want to know is what is going into the decision that is being made. I don't think we can tell them without sacrificing any other tests. We just want them to restore what has been canceled and be transparent about, and we want them to restore the Puerto Rico and the travel lands end to end.
But I think the question is whether if you would trade that, adding the census, the field test back in at the expense of perhaps testing a communications plan, at the expense of doing a partnership program. I think that's kind of, how do we signal? We don't have to use this language, but the idea is to signal, yes, we want to add this back in, but don't start trading off.
Let's not divide and conquer, right?
I don't think that they would do that anyway.
Well, we don't, but can I just say,
I think we're making recommendations, which is, say don't
I guess
pooch,
anything we say, ask them to do, they could do at the expense of something else
Right.
probably, so
But we
maybe we
wanna
can't
make it-
really do that.
But we want to make it clear that as a group, we're recommending that if the pie is like this, don't chop it out of something else. I think we can say without or if we're saying you need to add it, we don't care what we don't, and we remain silent without sacrificing anything else. We're saying cancel whatever you think, but we want that. And I don't think we're saying cancel something else so that we can have that.
But you can't, if you're talking about a budget and the pie is this big.
Right.
You can't expect that they would add that and not take away something else. So you can't say add and don't take away. The pie is only this big.
That's not our role.
We can't hear you.
we don't use this standard for any other recommendation. We're playing into that conversation about it being a budgetary reason. So we've made 100 recommendations over the last, say, 5 years or whatever, and we've never tried to do their budget for them. So in some ways, the NAC is a little bit like being a politician. Like, we don't have a budget. We just make recommendations regardless of whatever their budget is, which you could say is fiscally irresponsible. But so in some ways, that's not our job. We've made recommendations before, such as we think that this test should be included, or this question should be included on the census. And there was a whole bunch of costs that went with that, but we didn't have to account for that in our recommendation before. And I think adding that, making this recommendation take on that burden is somewhat unfair to that recommendation. Does that make sense? Because we've never asked it before.
Definitely. We're out of our lane.
I don't agree with that.
We have to stay in our lane, our driving lane. No, I'm not inching back. I'm saying.
No, I'm inching back on the screen. I'm taking
Oh.
it away. I'm slowly inching away to this part. Are we okay with this? Are we just doing it on it? Okay.
I'm all for moving on also, but I would just note that I think issues of budgetary trade-offs are going to become more and more salient over the next couple of years as we face our current environment and as we get closer and closer to 2020. It also strikes me that maybe there's a way to have it both ways by changing the recommendation to one where NAC strongly urges that the census reconsider its cancellation of the field test, with the view that NAC thinks that something really important is lost by that. I'm not saying it in the right words, but instead of, telling it what to do, that what we're telling them is that they should reconsider the fact that they canceled it and that something really important is lost.
Yeah.
That's a very good formulation.
I don't think we have the luxury not to address the budget at this time. The fact is that the Bureau is not going to get the resources it needs to do the plan it anticipated to do. That's a fact. Number two, we're running out of time. We have less than, I would say, a year and a half until Bureau goes into full implementation mode. So they're going to be making some real hard decisions between now and the next few months based on what their appropriations are going to be for FY18. And I think what we want to know is, how are you going to decide what you're going to cancel? And what impact will that have? So if you decide that you're only going to hire half of the partnership specialists that your plan had planned on, why did you decide to do that as opposed to something else? And then what does that mean? And I think that is what the information at least I would really want to be able to get as a member of this advisory body, because then that means there's certain things we're going to have to do externally as a result of that.
But don't you think that's a different question? I mean.
And I submitted something to Chair NAC that's a.
Can I ask a question, and I'm going to use my new member privilege to ask this question. If we voted on a recommendation, can we go back and just change it at any point?
We would just have to re-vote on it after we've edited it now, as opposed to.
And the reason why I bring that up is we have 20 minutes and we're still back on recommendation 1, and I know there are several that we want to send to the Bureau. And as Arturo said, we're running out of time literally now, but also we have a year, and if we want to get meaningful recommendations to the Bureau, I think, we need to make some tough decisions on what we're gonna really present to them and stick with it.
So are we just going to go with the one we voted on?
I don't even have that language anymore. So why don't we read this one and see if we're okay with it? And if not, we fix it and then just move on?
Okay.
So now we've got NAC strongly urges the census to develop a plan to address the canceled 2017 field tests on tribal lands and in Puerto Rico through the 2018 end-to-end test. Is that what we wanted to say?
Is anybody opposed?
I thought the question was to reinstate it. You're just saying to address it.
So once you say to reinstate the canceled instead of address. So take address and
I just mean to keep the original idea of that recommendation. Right.
Reinstate the canceled.
So I wanted to just, it's actually in the Chair NAC, they have it on in the email, but I wanted to address what Arturo said, which is TikTok, 18 months. So I think, do we, want to be making very much, because they're going to ask us trade-offs. How are we going to weigh in? Are we going to say, oh, you don't want to, are we going to weigh in on oh, no, don't cancel that? You know what I mean? So I don't know. Moving forward, I'm just throwing out there at some point, they're going to ask our advice about what to trade off.
Well, can I point out, Arturo asked that question about what trade-offs are we already making and what's being canceled? They said no, nothing, and then it came out something, right? I mean, so that, because when I use that against later, no, that wasn't correct. So part of the only way that we can ask for trade-offs, what the trade-offs are, and why they made those trade-offs is if we know what the trade-offs decisions were. So we just all have to be aware of pushing on that question of what have you already not fudged, but like traded off on? We just need to be, really, you've not made any changes?
I mean, and I'm constantly asking. So with this decision, what did we lose? Like, I mean, I think everything, and what did we lose? I think you just keep asking that.
One of the things that people maybe aren't totally thinking about is that I think, my understanding is that the census for each of its directorates, like, makes scalable plans and says, here's the budget we have now, here's what we would do if we had more money, here's what we would do if we had more money. So like, when we're asking, what are you cutting, what are you trading off, they're saying, we didn't cut anything because we're using that baseline plan for what we would do if we didn't have the additional money that we plan to or hope to have. But when we say, are you doing everything that you hoped to do? The answer is absolutely not. But I don't think there's any, I think the likelihood of them ever getting that full level of funding where they're able to do everything they want to do it's non-existent. So I think there are ways that they're being like shady about it, but then there's also ways that they're, that's also how they create their plans. So I think
10 languages instead of 20 languages.
When we're talking about we're talking about it as a zero-sum game, like you either do or don't do something, and they're talking about it as shades of a total plan. So,
May I make a recommendation about the recommendations, given that we've got 10 or 20 minutes? Yes. And Arturo said he sent something. I assume it's about the broader transparency question. And if we at least did that, we could say we finished one little set.
Where is it?
He sent it, but they've got to find it and move it
I've
up.
got to, oh yeah, that should be up there.
Is that it, Arturo?
No, there's something more recent than that.
There's Arturo right there.
Yeah.
That's the old one?
I could just read it to you. You want to do that? As the period for testing and making adjustments to the 2020 census operational plan comes to a close, the Bureau will make additional changes to the plan based on available appropriations and research findings. The NAC recommends that the Census Bureau be transparent about its criteria for such decisions, including the canceling or pausing of certain aspects of the plan, and explain the impact of the decisions on its ability to achieve a fair and accurate census. Yeah, that's it.
Julie, do you want to read that one, or are we?
As the period for testing and making adjustment to the 2020 census operational plan comes to a close, there's something missing
Yes.
there, comes, I'm going to stick that in there. We'll separate that. It comes to a close. The Bureau will make additional changes to the plan based on available appropriations and research findings. The NAC recommends that the Census Bureau be transparent about its criteria for such decisions, including the canceling or pausing certain aspects of the plan, and explain the impact of the decisions on its ability to achieve a fair and accurate census. Terry.
I'm
So
getting
Arturo, quick question. Are you saying they should be transparent to the NAC or just generally to the public? Or both, or?
Both.
Both.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. We can put some-
I mean, they're transparent to us, they're transparent to the public, right? Because we're a public entity and everything they tell us is public information.
This is Jim. I just have an inquiry for Arturo. I'm wondering is, there's transparency when there's an opportunity to actually do something about it, but because I think that's what we're talking about. We want to be able to be aware of what their decision-making process was and why they did it. but presumably we also want to have sufficient time that we can have some kind of response to that, rather than just having them tell us, by the way, this is why we did it, and we don't really have time to change that, so here it is.
So what's your question?
I
mean,
guess
I know what you're saying.
Presumably, we want to have transparency with sufficient time before the decision becomes final that we can have some kind of input. You know, if in fact they're going to change, if they're going to bring in one program but they're going to eliminate another one, presumably we would want to have a chance to comment on that before the decision becomes final and kind of irrevocable, just because the timeline is such they can't, the decision's got to be final.
Right. Oh, I'm fine with adding something that suggests that they should provide information to us before the decision is made. Is that what you're getting at? So we could weigh in and maybe independently go to appropriators and say, unless you give them more money, these are the consequences.
That's exactly right, because otherwise it just ends up becoming a fait accompli that here it is what it is. There's nothing you can do about it, but this is why we did it, and this is the impact of it.
Okay.
And we want to be able to have in the ability to influence whether it's in terms of appropriations or in terms of the decision-making process.
But there,
before the decision becomes
So that we
final.
have an opportunity to influence it again.
there are some things that, you know, they have drop dead dates for. And this was exactly that case. They explained to us at the time that it was being canceled because they hadn't received the budget yet, and without having the budget, they could not do the hiring of staff they would need to be able to do those tests during the 2017 test. So it was based, you know, they had made the plans, they had put a drop dead date. That was that. I don't think it was a matter of priorities that they decide, okay, we don't have enough money, so we're not going to do these two. There may have been other things where they could wait longer and cut them or not cut them later. So I don't think, you know, in cases like this, that there's what we're asking for is even feasible or sensible.
Some of the issues that have been raised. So we added the phrase, the NAC recommends that the Census Bureau be transparent in a timely fashion about its criteria, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we follow up with, ideally, the Bureau would consult with the NAC prior to finalizing decisions to allow for input from members. So ideally, right, means it may not happen in every single case, but that is what, as NAC, you would like to see. And in a timely fashion sort of signals, so don't wait till the next NAC meeting to say something, like when it happens, say it, and perhaps we'll be able to be useful, you know, as a collective.
So in my view, I think what we just added actually weakens the first part of it, because now we are basically saying you must ask or you must consult. So I think the first part of the recommendation was stronger without the second part.
The first part that I heard was people was concerned that it's just a report back, that it's a done deal, there's no opportunity for NAC to weigh in, and it's basically just a blanket reporting function, as opposed to the reason for having the second part is to say, we want to have a chance to weigh in when it's feasible, when it makes sense, so that before you make a decision that might be, you know, very harmful in a way that perhaps the Bureau may not fully be aware of or you know, prioritize in the same way, that there's an opportunity for members to weigh in.
So I'm new, obviously this is my first meeting, but if that is how it works in the past, is that they come to you for consultation, then yes, but otherwise, prior to it taking any action, no.
But we're an advisory board. I mean, I think that's really critical. I mean, they're not going to consult with us and say, is this okay? I mean.
Right. Or
But
they could
is-
say, FYI, we're about to do this.
We've already done this, so let's figure out how to make it okay. I mean, you know.
Okay.
Let's see what Ala,
Do we like it? You don't like it? Your mic went off. Yolanda, your mic went off.
I'm sorry. I am recalling, as a result of what Alice said, that they didn't have the money to hire. So maybe we should just end with ability to achieve a fair and accurate census.
Can I just make a general structural? So the NAC is set up for us to make recommendations via working groups. And so I'm struggling with, ideally, the Bureau will consult with the NAC prior to finalizing decisions to allow input from members. But the method would have to be through a working group. Am I missing that? Like,
No, we're doing them right now, not in a
I
working
guess that's
group.
true.
So
But
we don't
we'll-
have to be through a working group.
Okay, so, but we're just making recommendations versus them coming to us, right? So you guys are saying, well, we want the information up front, so give us a presentation on blah, 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 and then we're going to comment on it. Is that? Okay.
So I think under FACA, what they could do is call a public meeting that would have to be listed in the Federal Register. Then it has to be listed for a certain period of time, and then we can have the public meeting. And then we could have a separate public meeting where we discuss recommendations and make those where I think there has to be a public comment period as a part of that. So this will never be a quick turnaround process for the NAC because of how FACA is written, is my understanding. And
I'm sorry, what was that?
Saying it's a little bit pointless.
Right, and so maybe if we could make it more pointed to, are there specific subjects where we might have working groups in where we can really hammer in with, you better fully fund the partnership program. You better, make sure your communications messages are well-researched for sensitive audience. You know what I'm just saying? I'm just struggling with, again, the process.
Ditas, are you trying to make this even more specific?
I'm trying to make it actionable.
Okay.
On their
I'm trying to
part.
understand, yeah.
Yeah, because, okay, we're set up, the way we're set up to give recommendations, we want to make sure that they can take an action on it, or they can just say, that's just not the way we're set up, right? So I'm saying, I don't know. I want the transparency, but, so ideally, the Bureau will consult with the NAC prior to finalizing decisions to allow input from members.
Can't you do this through the virtual meetings that you guys have been holding? Like, those have been public, right? And you could have them present, and then there could be discussion amongst NAC members, and there could be a recommendation. It would just be done virtually rather than
So
in
they make,
person.
so I'm just questioning, like, they make hundreds of decisions. Where's the cutoff? Like, oh, we're gonna do, I just want to make it actionable, like, where
You're
should we
wondering
be?
about the italicized portion of it or the whole thing? Just the end
Oh, I
part?
guess the italicized thing is what confused me, because that's like, where they need to consult with us on everything,
So
and
we
like,
can-
who sets a virtual meeting? Who sets the agenda for the virtual meeting? Are we asking them to set it? Do they decide, hey, you made this recommendation, but we're not
Because-
gonna take it up?
Yeah, because the first part, you can, it could be that the issues with the italicized portion of it, but the first part, just asking them to explain the criteria when they're leaving things, making decisions is to not include something versus, or putting it on the chopping block, so to speak, is this a little bit similar to before when we said, when you talk about administrative records, please use these terms, third-party data and administrative records. And then from then on, when they had presentations, they had to include that as an explanation. So in some ways, we're just asking them, when you talk about things on the chopping block that aren't going to happen, could you please include an explanation as to how it impacts the mission of the Census Bureau, including achieving a fair and accurate count? That's what we're asking is, when they talk about it, be explicit, because it doesn't have to be like we have to do something or it goes to a working group. It's just asking them that when they talk about these things, this is what they also include. And then that
I
could just
get
be
that.
included going forward.
I get it. So it's transparency to everybody, not just the NAC. I think that take out the ideally, because it's like, really,
I
we're going to weigh
agree.
in?
Take off the
Yeah, that's what,
ideally.
kind of like, we're not set up to weigh in real time. But if you're going to cut, the partnership program by X percent, that's going to go public, and publicly, they need to tell us. They can either, let us know, but they should be telling everybody why they're cutting it by X percent, which is what we're saying.
This is Jim. I just have one suggestion, maybe, because it seems like we're all on the same page on transparency. There's a second piece of this we've spent a lot of time talking about, which is consultation. So maybe the way to deal with this is to come up with a second point on consultation, and it may just be that we need to finesse the language a little bit and not try to hammer it all out now, because I know we spent a lot of time on it, and maybe just bring it up again tomorrow, that at least the second portion in terms of consultation.
Okay, so we are in just about 3 minutes before we need to leave. Are we at a point where recommendation one, we feel comfortable with, James, you're going to work on something sort of separate, right, for consultations? Is that what you said? As a separate recommendation?
Maybe work in consultation with Arturo?
Oh, to amend this one here.
Just the second portion, because I think we're all on the same page on transparency. It's really just the second portion. What language do we want to use in terms of what consultation do we want to provide? What kind of input do we want to provide?
Can we separate those so we can vote on this part and then you can do something else about consultation?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I think that's the way to do
So
it.
are we okay with the way it is now with that part removed? Read it over, or do you want me to read it? As the period for testing and making adjustments to the 2020 Census Operational Plan comes to a close, the Bureau will make additional changes to the plan based on available appropriations and research findings. The NAC recommends that the Census Bureau be transparent in a timely fashion about its criteria for such decisions, including the canceling or pausing of certain aspects of the plan, and explain the impact of the decisions on its ability to achieve a fair and accurate census.
Does anyone against the way this is written? Hearing none, we'll pass recommendation one as an official recommendation. Okay, and then you guys will work on that ideally part. So it is 4:59, and we do need to come to a close. We will continue this recommendation live tomorrow afternoon. If you guys have additional recommendations, go ahead and email that to the Gmail account. And we will try to.
So wait, did we approve 2 and 3, or did we not?
We did approve them.
We approved 2 and 3?
The new language?
Yes, I recall.
Okay. All right, so 1, 2, and 3 are good?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Viras, how many recommendations you have there?
Yeah, email it around.
Oh, can we send the rest of the
can we-
document to everybody so they can see them and edit?
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean,
That's what
it's probably a little sloppy, but you guys will get it. She'll send it out tonight. So you guys have the rest of them all in there, right? Yep. Tara's gonna throw it all to, it doesn't have to be pretty, just.
And Ditas, before you close, I wanted to do the thing about the undercount. Yeah. Okay, I just, because when the undercount working group met yesterday, several folks could not be there who were part of the working group. And so I'm asking that we all have breakfast together in the mezzanine restaurant tomorrow morning when it opens at 6:30. I know that's early, but I know you're in for the cause here. And what we want to do is just begin to give some thought to possible recommendations that we might make. And it is buffet, so you can just get it, and I will try to make sure there's, tables so that we can be together. Arturo's smiling like you've got to be nuts. But, okay, and the other thing is that all NAC members, they left for you this morning at some point a copy of a PowerPoint that's entitled in NAC Undercount of Young Children Working Group Meeting 4. And this was the PowerPoint that Linda Jacobson, a demographer, did for us. And I encourage you to read it because I think it really brings home these issues of many of the issues about why it's hard to count young children. Okay? Thank you.
All right, so thank you guys so much for your time and attention today. Dinner tonight is going to be on your own, the organized dinner. Unfortunately, the director can't make that, so that's not happening. We will begin tomorrow at 8:30. The bus will pick you up at 7:30 a.m. from the hotel, and the bus will be leaving here in about 15 minutes from Gate 7. So everyone have a good evening, and thanks again.